I'm here with Kip Elder at Starr Guitars in Orlando, Florida, the land of my birth. And I wish that something this cool had been here when I was growing up and playing guitar, because I probably would have been the 14-year-old guy here just hanging out way too much.
I would have probably been that guy too.
Yeah, that's awesome. As a musician, we live in the age of the internet, where you can do anything. You don't need a record label anymore. You don't need all these sort of barriers between you and a fan. But the downside of that is you have to do everything. I'm promotion and self-releasing records and scheduling things and social media, shooting pictures and video that look like they're worth a damn. It's and these are all things that are not in my wheelhouse. The reason those other organizations existed was to support, even if they were crooked and they stole money and they took advantage of people, someone else booked a show or did that kind of stuff. So
sure.
Even it's that's a similar thing in the age of the internet. You got to do all this stuff.
And being a business owner and trying to be HR, accounts payable, accounts receivable,
right?
Production manager.
Yeah.
A lot of hats you have to wear when you do this on your own. I keep thinking back to when I was in my band days, and if I'd only known back then what I know now about running a business, maybe we could have been successful.
Right. Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably not, but maybe.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, does it affect how much time you spend actually finishing work and building things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I probably spend 50% of my day answering the phone, email, coordinating stuff, dealing with vendors. I probably spend a good amount of time not doing the work as I do doing the work, because frankly there's just so much else to do. I'm trying to land clients or maintain clients, or trying to make sure that they're placated and they're okay with what's happening, and
right.
Their stuff's not done yet.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. I was talking to a client, a big client, who has many people in their business, and trying to figure out who my contacts are, because there's so many people involved. There's a production person, and then there's there are HR people and accounts payable people, and I'm thinking, man, it would be so nice to have a team of people that could handle all these different things, and I could just go back to the paint booth and paint.
Right.
Or I could be out there woodworking. As a matter of fact, a big part of why I got into this was because I wanted to be a guitar builder. But at the moment, I'm so busy trying to paint guitars for all these people that need their stuff painted that I have zero time to go out there and sit at the sanding bench and sand stuff.
Right.
And it's driving me crazy, because I've got a couple builds that I'm supposed to be doing that are probably 2 or 3 years old at this point, and I feel horrible about it. But there's only so many hours of the day, and I have 10 plus hour days minimum, and man, if I don't get home, my wife's gonna kill me. So there's a certain amount of balance we have to have as human beings,
right?
And it's if I could do the managerial side less, I could be in the production side more. Unfortunately, there's just not enough money to go around at the moment to pay for a administrative staff as well as a production staff. So working on it.
That's the tension, though, is because there's a reason you became obsessed with this enough to try to do it as a life and a business,
right?
And then even as a musician who is just independent freelance, I really, really just like playing the guitar,
right,
and figuring things out and discovering new sounds and ideas. To do that as a living requires all of this other customer service stuff, And if you're the kind of person who wants to sand a guitar body for hours. You're not necessarily the same person who is like, I just want to be talking to people all day. I want to be, solving people's problems.
Absolutely. It's funny too. You get into this business because you have a passion for it. Whether as a musician. I mean, I was a guitar player long before I was a guitar builder, really. But I was always interested in how the guitar works. And I was really excited about the aesthetic nature, like the curves. And I'm always talking to my crew about, I want to make sure the curves are sexy, because I see from an artistic standpoint things like that. Lines being straight, curves being fluid, things like that. And there, you have a real passion for these things. Colors looking correct. Doing a sunburst right, where the color fades really smoothly and it's not chunky and clown bursty. Things like that are things that are so important to me, and that's why I got into this.
Right.
And so unfortunately, having to do the other stuff takes away from the passion side.
Right.
And that's where I think you start to kind of get burned out, and it would be nice to have the help. But,
yeah.
Unfortunately, it's guitars. And like I said, champagne wishes and beer pockets go in this business hand in hand. So it's tough, but anyway.
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Do you have a memory of like when the guitar bug got you? Like what happened?
Specifically.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, and I'm 46, almost 47, so there was a TV show, and it was the Bay City Rollers. And I remember seeing the bass player. I didn't know it was the bass player at the time because I didn't know the difference between basses and guitars. But he had this big white bass and it had all these knobs all over it. And they were on stage and they were rocking, and there was explosions and effects and lights, and it was awesome. And I thought to myself, that's cool. That's what I need to be doing. And I was taking piano lessons at the time, and I told my mom, I'm like, I don't want to take piano anymore. I'd like to get a guitar. And I think I was probably 7-ish at the time. And so for I guess it was Christmas, and they got me one of those little Sears. It had the pick guard from a Gibson Ripper bass,
okay.
But it had a kind of a Strat shape, and it was 3-tone sunburst, and it was really cool. And I couldn't play the thing. I couldn't play it forever, and it was not the best instrument, but I could sure dance around with it. It looked cool. So I think I was bit more by the aesthetic side of rock and roll and guitars, and I had this like visceral emotional attachment to how cool it was just to be in the rock star world, I guess. And so the guitar to me was the iconic part. Well, how do you get into this? Well, guitar was what drew me. I didn't really care about drums or anything else so much. It was just the guitar, and there was something neat about, especially that one white bass that was just like, man, that's cool. Turns out he was the bass player. Right.
But it captured your imagination, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it was off and running from there. And I was always like, I draw, and I've drawn my whole life. If you look at things that I drew back when I was a teenager or a kid, it's all guitars and people playing guitars. It's not, anything else. So I apparently have been fixated on this for quite a long time.
That's awesome. And then how did you go from there to the actual, were you taking apart guitars that you owned, or? Yeah, so when I was a teenager, I remember there was the one, Sears guitar, and we moved to Greece, and I was probably 12, 13. I was about 13 when I had gotten it was a red, candy apple red Stratocaster. And I'd started taking lessons, acoustic lessons and stuff prior to that, but I had to have this guitar because Eddie Van Halen had a red guitar with a maple neck and a white pickguard. And I'd seen this guitar, and it was, back in the mid-'80s,
it was pretty cheap. It was probably $150, I think, at the time. And I saved up enough money, allowance or whatever,
Right.
got that guitar. Well, I probably within 3 weeks of having that guitar, I had taken the pickguard apart, or taken it off, and then white striped the Van Halen stripes all over the thing.
Right.
You know, so that kind of started there. And then when I got back to the States, that thing ended up getting stripped and refinished a couple of times. And then I had gotten some parts from, I don't know where they came from. Back in the day, we had a store called Venom and Music, and they would sell parts. And you could buy bodies and necks, and they would have this big sale every year, and you could go buy, you know, you could get a good deal on stuff. And I remember having a Kramer Beretta neck and body. I don't know exactly where it came from, but that thing got painted a couple of times. And it was, you know, this was the late 80s, so I had painted aces, spades, graphics, and stuff all over it. And so that was, I did that in my, you know, our parents' garage, and that was pretty cool. So that kind of got me into the paint bug. And so again, everything I do seems to come back to painting guitars, or, you know, assembling
the
guitars
look and the
stuff.
aesthetic of that stuff. Yeah.
I like the painting side more than the woodworking side. You know, I've built guitars from scratch, you know, chunks of wood, and it's cool, but it's very time consuming, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I'm perfectly happy leaving the woodworking side to other people. I do, you know, when I do my own guitars now, especially like Fender platform stuff, I do modifications to them, and I make the contours a little sexier, you know, reshape the body a little bit, do our own headstocks and our own neck profiles and our own, you know, rolled over fretboard edges and stuff. But as far as like the main heavy lifting, I'm perfectly happy letting somebody else do that, you know. But I'll take it from there.
That's interesting, because it seems like there are more people, we were kind of talking about this earlier, but there's more people than ever building or assembling guitars. But
and most of them are coming from the same 3 shops.
Right. You buy a neck, buy a body, buy all your parts. But doing a decent finish is I mean, it's out of the reach of even a lot of really experienced builders. Setup, equipment, and like technique and all that kind of stuff.
And just shop space.
Right.
I mean, it takes so much space to store a plethora of bodies and necks, because they can't be, you know, laying on top of each other. You really got to have storage. And then you got to have, you know, things like we don't really think about is like air movement. If your guitar parts, you know, you sprayed a coat on them, well, they got to go somewhere to be stored. Well, you got to have air movement. They can't just be, you know, locked up somewhere. So then you have all that to consider too. Not to mention the equipment. We were talking about my compressor fiasco. You know, and the compressor, I mean, you know, that's a walloping machine right there.
Yeah.
So to support not only the finish, the gun side, you have the sanding side. Like we have all the fancy sanding equipment stuff. That's all air powered. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and the experience of knowing how to use that equipment and knowing what needs to happen where, you know, like production schedule kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All super important, and it's a lot more than it's a lot more than I think if I'd have known back then what I was biting off, I may have reconsidered. But it's been a lifetime of learning this stuff, and so, you know, this is something that I tell people too when I sell us as a finishing shop. If you're a guitar builder, especially if you're a start to scratch, or, you know, starting from scratch guitar builder, you probably really get off on the woodworking side of things. As a shop that does finish work, we are a solution for you, because you don't have to mess with the finishing side, which takes weeks. You really, how many guitars can you build in the time it takes you to suffer through trying to spray one of them?
Right.
You know, let alone 10 of them. So, I mean, we can help a company increase its output simply by not having to mess around with all the trouble and the, you know, just the process of finishing stuff. So that's a big spiel that I like to give people. Let us do the hard part.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense too. I mean, everything, because of how we can communicate with the internet, how easy it is to ship things nowadays. It's like everything becomes a little more compartmentalized, you know, like
specialized.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah, if you come down with a medical condition that you can't just go to a walk-in clinic. You know, if you need a specialist, that's what that specialist specializes in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do. We specialize in finishing. And like I said, I'm happy to outsource a lot of the woodworking stuff to somebody who maybe enjoys that part of it or has a shop full of CNC equipment, because, you know, if we tried to be a full-blown guitar shop, it would cost us a couple of $1 million to outfit the place.
Right.
And you don't think about, like, the CNC machine alone is $250,000 maybe, you know. Then you have to have the computers to run it, the technician to operate it,
where you learn
program it,
how to run it. Yeah.
and then that's more time.
Yeah.
You know, so at the end of the day, it's like we could all just, you know, the only bad part about outsourcing to me is because none of us live in the same place.
Right.
And there's the shipping, you know, aspect, the cost of shipping, the time frame of shipping. It'd be cool if we all lived in the same area, but, you know, unfortunately we don't.
Yeah, that's the double-edged sword too of just the social aspect of it. You know, like I do a lot of work for people long distance, and we don't ever get to hang out, which is a bummer.
Right.
Because you also, like, just as an aside, we went over to Kennedy Space Center, which was at least 10 times cooler than I anticipated it being. I was just reminded of that thing of, like, when you have people all working on a problem and they bump into each other at like the water cooler or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what if you tried this? You know, like, I feel like that's for those, especially someone like me who works in isolation a lot. Yeah. That's a lacking feature and just in life in general.
I've come to find that Facebook, ironically, is very interesting. We have a electric guitar finishers group on there that it was started basically with the intent of helping, I guess, your DIY guy try to do a decent finish on guitars. And so that a lot of newbies will be on there and they will ask, you know, real, you know, innocent questions. How do you even remotely do that? You know, this part of the job. Right. And it's interesting to see, you know, especially after doing this for so long, how before you get in it, you really have no idea, and you kind of hope for the best. But the cool thing about the internet is that we do have resources now where you can get information. Right. Like when I started this, there was hardly any information that you couldn't get from the internet. You'd have to find some expert, you know, or expert. Right. Yeah. and try to get some information. And you know, not being in a guitar town, it was really hard here. You know, I'm literally relying on guys who were, well, not necessarily vintage guitar experts, but guys who had been just doing this for so long, they kind of, by proxy, had just been doing it at the same era that the vintage guitar guys were doing it from. You know what I mean? So they were all lacquer based, and they had their way of doing things. And then we started getting into the more high tech stuff in the automotive, and I'm, you know, thankfully the internet had been around at that point, and started to get a lot of misinformation and started to piece together, well, I kind of heard this is how you do it, well, about this, and then, you know, as the more you get into it, you start to realize things. And thank God we have a lot of automotive guys in town who can at least help with the automotive products that we use. Oh, yeah. You know, and the application of, like, we do a lot of, we have a urethane system that we use that's, like, really expensive, but it's amazing. The finishes we get are just crazy nice. But it's all PPG automotive system, and thankfully I have some really great PPG guys in town that we use, and they have been a godsend coming over here, watching me, you know, spray stuff. They don't paint guitars, but they do paint cars, and they can look at what I'm doing and go, well, here's what I would do. Okay, sure, no problem. And certainly it has helped.
Yeah, for sure. Like this is a car color, right? Pinecrest green, I think.
Pinecrest green, yes.
Yeah.
This is a Ronin specific color, by the way.
Right.
I'm not allowed to paint that on other stuff.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was curious because obviously the connection here is that I love these guitars, and you paint them, and then I'm from Orlando, and so which growing up, I was even thinking about this being back here. Growing up in Orlando, I was just not exposed to really any cool gear.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, compared to other like guitar towns where you would run across like amazing vintage Fenders and Gibsons.
Right.
I don't have any memory of any of that stuff.
Were you here when Guitars Plus was here?
Yes.
But Irv, he was like the one guy that I can think of that had the cool
That was the
stuff.
That was the store downtown, right?
Yeah.
Like
it was
a
right
warehouse.
next to Guitar Factory. Was right next door on the train tracks on Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was younger, I would take guitars to Guitar Factory to get stuff fixed and just kind of like hang around, you know, because just being exposed to anybody building a guitar, you know, was like,
right. Yeah. Whoa. It's funny. Bill and Doug used to work on all my stuff when I first got down here, and I was playing in this band called The Kill, and we were rumbling around 94, 95, and I would take my stuff and they would set it up for me, and I would they would do it while you're standing there next to them, and I would watch what they were doing. And so I started to realize that, well, I could keep bringing my stuff here, or I could just start buying tools.
Right.
And that's basically how all this nonsense started. It was just acquiring tools, and figuring out how to do it myself. But the cool store we had too was Thoroughbred. Remember Thoroughbred?
Oh,
Thoroughbred was over in Tampa.
Yeah.
And so we would all, have to drive to Thoroughbred to see the really cool stuff, because they had a whole vintage department, and they had like all the custom shop Gibsons and Fenders, and
I don't know if I ever made it over there. That's
Okay. Well, it was pretty damn cool. Irv had a lot of cool vintage stuff too, and he was real knowledgeable, and that was nice because, if you wanted to try a Plexi from the 60s, he probably had one at the time and could show you what it sounded like and why it was cool.
Right.
But he, unfortunately, when he moved, man, that was kind of it. We had Guitar Den for a while, and that place was really nice, but he didn't quite have the same amount of the depth of the stuff that, like Irv had.
Right, yeah. Well, and also, I think it's just how many, depending on where you live, there just are not a lot of those instruments in circulation,
Right, absolutely. I could imagine, like, Nashville's just probably ate up with really cool guitars.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Oh, I mean, what's the Carter Vintage Guitars? This is the shop out there, and it's just not only for cool vintage stuff, but just if you wanted to go find a bunch of small luthiers, like because there's so many players in that town, and there's everybody's cycling through gear. You come across all this stuff that you can't play anywhere most of the time.
Right.
So that's amazing.
There was a time I thought, well, maybe I could move to Nashville and maybe go work for Joe Glazer or Groon or somebody like that. Unfortunately, my wife didn't find Nashville as appealing as I did. So we ended up sticking it out here and kind of, blew this up. But I always thought that would have been a cool thing to do. Who knows? Maybe one day.
Yeah. Well, also you found a niche here. I mean, I know your work comes from everywhere, but
yes, thank God for FedEx and UPS.
Yeah, there's also something to be said about like being a player in Nashville or LA or something. There's just so many musicians who are better than you.
Right, I know. That's the joke in Nashville. Like your cab driver's a better guitar player than you are.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything weird or unique about this finish or process? I mean, you do all the relicking and.
The only thing that's really, I don't know if I'd say it's unique.
You're welcome to.
How our finishes are done is, I think, kind of unique to us. I mean, they're really, really thin. You can see how thin these things are.
Right.
And the vintage stuff, especially these Relic guitars that we do, has I like to call it a vintage character. which means that they're not as highly sanded and polished out as our, like the high gloss stuff is.
Right.
But if you look at old guitars, they just don't have great paint jobs.
Right.
And part of the allure of the thin vintage finish is based off of those old guitars. And well, I always joke with John, I'm like, John from Ronan, I'm like, you want a thin vintage finish, it's a crappy finish. And it's like, I think he gets the joke. But, you have a minimal amount of coats. You can only sand these things so much before you burn through them. And if you want a nice solid, color application, you have to be really careful not to sand through these things. This stuff, our clear coat that we use on these there's one step that has some plasticizers, and then the top 2 or 3 coats, depending on if it's metallic or not, have 0 plasticizers.
Okay.
Which means there's like no flexibility to the finish, which is why they crack real easy.
Right.
And also why they will chip out and scratch and stuff real easy. But that's kind of the thing, is we're replicating a 50-year-old finish, and we have about 2 weeks to do it. So we really gotta, light them up. We use a special sealer coat on these too that helps with the finish syncing and the finish checking and all the cool stuff that makes an old guitar look like an old guitar.
Do you have any feelings about the Relic thing, or making a vintage finish versus something that's like shiny and perfect
and new? Like the Relic versus like the guys who want to argue about you should just blade the thing instead of beat it up prematurely.
Sure.
I mean, to me, I like the character. I also look at these like these are almost like a painting to me. It's an art piece.
Yeah.
And every nick and ding and scratch on these, in my mind, I have created a story around. When I age guitars, cool. There's a story behind every single spot. Like, I don't want to say that we have like a pattern or a boilerplate way of putting dents in guitars, but there is a certain amount of every guitar is going to have dents here, or up here. There's going to be wear spots. There's going to be some spots here, from just because when you look at hundreds and hundreds of vintage guitars, you start to see a pattern forming.
Right.
There are spots that wear generally faster than others, and so when I do one of these, I basically, and I'm the one that does all the relicing at this point, I'm basically telling a story that the guitar, if it had been around for 50 years, would have told. So yeah,
that's beautiful.
Thanks. They use these roasted maple necks for the Ronans, and it's funny because they say they want them with an amber tint. And the funny thing about them is the neckwood shows up, and it having been roasted kind of has that color in it already.
Right.
And I'm like applying amber to it, and a lot of times the first couple of passes with the tint, it's like you can't even really see it. So it takes a little bit of ambering to get these things to look like this. But it does give it a nice warm. It does warm it up a bit.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, a guitar with a finish like this, I think this is a very artfully done.
Thanks.
Relicing. There's also some charm to like I just took it to the belt sander version too, if you want that kind of vibe, but
the hammered.
Hand hammered guitars. I think though it's just about what the guitar projects to the player too. When you see it, when you pick it up, it's about what it says. A like perfectly constructed, finished guitar is going to say one thing to you, versus something that kind of comes with this character and imaginary backstory.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, same thing when you buy a vintage guitar. You look at it and it's usually pretty roughed up. And if it's a really roughed up guitar, that thing sounds good and has played really well.
Yeah.
The ones that are pristine, you're probably like,
Right, exactly,
something's wrong with it.
All the years of the vibrations aligning the molecules in the wood and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing that's cool about these is you don't have to be so worried about them. Every time, man, I tell you, every time we finish a brand new guitar and I have to hand it to somebody and I put it together, I have to be so careful. I barely play the thing, because when we do the presentation, it's like you want it to be like, whoa, and then let them put the marks in it. But they always feel real, like, I don't want to say sterile, but there's a little bit of, I don't know, cold maybe, sterile feeling to them. When you pick up one of these right off the bat, it's just like,
Right.
It feels good already.
Yeah.
Broken in, I guess, would be the way to describe it. Also, the necks are finished with the same stuff. These are actually unplasticized entirely. No sealer coats or anything. They're just straight up unplasticized nitro. And that's why you don't have that gummy. Right. Even as long, you can play these things forever. You'll wear through the finish before it gets gummy.
Right.
Which is pretty cool.
Oh, I love that. I can't deal with a sticky neck.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the plasticizers that are hanging around. Without the plasticizers, and that's the big thing about the Gibson guitars, everybody was bitching how gummy and just gooey they feel, is I think they really overloaded them with the plasticizers at whoever makes their lacquer for them.
Oh yeah.
And I think they do it from a production standpoint. I think they do it so there's no chance that thing will crack as it goes from Nashville to wherever in the world it's got to go to. It'll arrive safely.
Right.
Because I'm sure they don't want to have a sales guy call and say, "Hey man, I opened the case and it cracked."
Right. Yeah.
So they overdo it.
Right.
But I'm not a big fan of the gooey lacquer either. That's why I like these. I don't know. I was talking to the gang about the difference in finishes and how they feel, and it's like sometimes they say, well, I can't tell if it's a urethane or if it's a lacquer. And I'm like, does it feel cold, or when you touch it, does it feel warm? Like when you literally when you touch these, the minute you touch them, it's instantly warm. Like touch a spot, just instantly warms up. Right. The urethane ones don't necessarily do that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's I don't know, man. This is paint nerd stuff at this point.
No, it's awesome.
But yeah, I just feel like that's what that's what's cool about old guitars.
Well, I feel too. I think it's nerdy, but I feel like a great guitar is this combination of all these micro elements. Once you get past like, what kind of wood is it made out of? What's the neck made out of? What are the pickups? And like general hardware design choices, scale length, etc. Like the difference between one guitar feeling awesome and another guitar feeling dead is all these micro things. Like I like to have a floating trem, and so I've gone down the rabbit hole of like the springs. The springs
we were talking about the different colors.
Yeah, exactly. And I haven't even dove into this, but like I have my friend David Torn is a tremolo nut, and he has he wants the springs to both resonate at the same pitch when you strum them on the back, and for the pitch to be in tune with at least a note on the guitar, like not in between.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He's deep. He's a deep cat.
That's like Eric Johnson deep.
Yeah. But when you start to think about, especially on a floating guitar, like the springs are one of the main connection to the body, it totally changes how the strings feel. If you have some really loosey-goosey vintage springs, you've got like 2 or 5 on there, the stiffness of the string changes drastically.
Sure.
And then it's also, at least on Strat style guitars, it's like a resonant feature.
There's a reverb.
Yeah.
Going on inside that spring right there.
So it makes sense that if it's resonating not in tune with the instrument itself, there's going to be some kind of weird cancellation or sour. So even the idea that that one finish is a little more reactive and alive than another, it's like I think that stuff
makes
matters.
sense, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's just, at least to the nerds,
right.
It's like,
well, I think the nitrocellulose and I'm not a chemist, but I know that the cellulose part, same thing that makes wood, you know,
Oh,
trees,
yeah.
cellulose fibers.
Hmm.
So to me, being that it's somewhere in there cellulose compound,
Mm-hmm.
surely it starts to resonate with the wood
That's intriguing.
as opposed to dampening like you know, urethane or polyester will.
Right.
You know, it literally becomes one with it.
Hmm.
I'm gonna stick with that story.
Yeah, I like that. That's awesome. I wonder if that might be my wife, actually. Hey, just wrapping up.
Cool.
How's it going?
Good.
Oh, awesome. Filming a little something.
Sorry, I was
That's okay.
seeing you, and I was worried about interrupting
Yeah, we gotta get going. Yeah.
the filming part. I mean.
Yeah, that's all right.
Hi, we're back. You
we
carry
should
on.
we should probably get rolling. I lost a little track of time.
It's easy to do that.
Yeah, man. Well, especially when you're talking about something interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks, man. Thanks for coming by.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Sweet, man.